I think my wife is a Skinwalker. My wife and I just recently welcomed my sweet daughter into this world, but I've got a bad feeling she may not be as sweet as she seems to be to me. But to understand why I'd say that about my own daughter, I need to give a little backstory to the situation. We haven't been married very long, as it's not really frowned upon to marry soon in my family. But when we were first dating and staying with my parents, we slept in their living room, and when we woke up one morning, I noticed the door was still unlocked, but I was always sure to keep it locked. I never really noticed anything else though. I never saw any handprints on the door or windows. I never saw anything out of the ordinary at all. That would be a telltale sign of an intruder. I brought it up to my dad, so he took me to his office to check the CCTV monitor. No one had approached the house all night. In fact, everything was eerily still, except for a very large cat that would always hang out in their yard. That cat had been around for a long time though. We always thought maybe it was a neighbor's cat because we lived out in the back country of Texas and there were other people out in the woods. But growing up there, I did actually notice a lot of things that scared the shit out of me. I once saw my cat, Salem, shape-shifting right in front of my eyes when my little cousin and I were playing soldiers near the woods. One of the old men down the road would tell us stories of a panther that would kill people's horses, but I wondered if it was really my shape-shifting cat or something. My dad also told me a story of a man that lived on our land before we did that killed his daughter's bus driver for what she said he did to her one day when she came home crying, and he would see the ghost of that dad standing over him when he slept with a blood-stained shirt and evil radiating from his eyes. And of course, countless other stories of all sorts of things that go bump in the night. None of that really seemed related to that night I noticed the door was unlocked. However, since then, I've noticed a lot of things are different about her than she used to be, but nothing too extreme, just minor things. Things that only people really close to her would know. Like she started wearing makeup when she never really liked it before, and what she liked to eat changed. But I didn't really know how to explain it. I had only known her a few months, and only had to ask what she liked to eat so few times for dates and family gatherings. Every time I tried to talk to her about it, or ask her if something was wrong, she shot it down. So I just had to deal with the fact that maybe I was just discovering her for who she really is. I got used to it. It wasn't a big deal after all. Like I said, it wasn't anything major, and she still seemed like the girl I loved. And like I said, we had only been dating for a few months at the time. She also started calling me Delicious, which wasn't really a pet name we had used before. I tried to ignore how uncomfortable her tone was when she used it. It was probably just sexual anyway. More recently, I've noticed odd smells originating from under our house when I'm out working around the yard. I've also noticed a greater number of flies and carrion birds. I was hoping a lost dog or some large rodent had just crawled under there and died, but one day I found the promise ring I had given her that she said she lost before we even moved to this house. It looked extremely old now and caked with mud. I started nosing under the house near where the ring was laying, and I found a large indentation on the earth, as if something was laying there but had been moved. Soon after that day, she surprised me with the news that we were going to be parents, and I had been so excited at first until I realized something. I just knew my initial suspicions were proven true when she got pregnant. You see, my wife warned me right away not to expect children because of an accident she had when she was small. She was infertile. Did I see a Skinwalker? This happened in September of last year. We live on a huge horse farm in southern Kentucky. My mother, the horse fanatic in the family, travels all over the country taking out horses to shows and competitions. During that time, I usually get stuck at home with the responsibility of feeding the animals and other non-show horses. My parents were at a weekend-long show. It was around 5:30 p.m., and I was on my way down to the barn to give the horses their evening meal. Our horses are arranged into multiple sections, pregnant mares in one, show horses in another, etc. I was almost done feeding and only had the southwest corner section to go when I looked into the field that lined that section that we let the horses graze in the spring and saw something that I really can't explain with words. It was far enough away that I couldn't make out facial features, but I could tell it wasn't human. It was standing upright on two legs that seemed to be on backwards. Instead of the knees going forward, they went the opposite way. The closest thing I can describe it to would be like a very thin, hairless horse standing up. I didn't notice any arms, but with how far away it is, I'm assuming they could have just been so close to the body that I didn't see them. It scared the hell out of me, but I don't think it saw me. It looked like it was watching my house, which was about 100 yards to the northwest of there. I kind of just stood there. I didn't really know what to do, so I just kind of slowly started backing up until I was back in the barn. There's a small part in the barn where there are a couple missing boards that you can easily see out of, so I stood there watching it for a while. I didn't want to try to go back home because I was worried it would see me, so I just waited. I waited for what felt like forever, before this thing kinda turned around and walked away into the woods. The way it walked was the scariest thing about it. It was so unnatural. I waited a little bit, then ran back to the house as quickly as I could. The next morning my parents got home, so I didn't have to feed the horses again after that. I've never told anyone about this either, but after discovering skinwalkers, I'm wondering if that's what it is. If not a skinwalker, what else could it be? I've never seen it again after that, nor has anyone in my family ever mentioned seeing anything like it. I always thought the legends about skinwalkers were just that, legends. Tales to scare children around campfires, to keep them from wandering too far into the wilderness. But then I came face to face with one, and I realized that they were all too real. It happened when I was out camping in the middle of nowhere, far away from civilization. I'd always loved the wilderness, the feeling of being completely cut off from the world, but that night, something felt off. The air was thick and oppressive, and I could hear strange noises coming from the darkness. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that it was just my imagination, that I was being paranoid. But as the night wore on, the noises grew louder and more persistent. It sounded like something was scratching at the walls of my tent, trying to get in. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but I knew deep down that it was something far more sinister. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the scratching stopped. The air grew still and quiet, and I felt a sense of dread settle over me. That's when I heard the whispering. It was a low, guttural sound, like nothing I had ever heard before. It was coming from just outside my tent, and it seemed to be growing louder and more insistent by the second. I wanted to run, to flee into the safety of my car and drive far away from this place, but something held me back, some morbid curiosity that made me want to know what was out there. And then it happened. The tent shook violently, as if something was trying to tear it apart from the outside. I could hear the fabric tearing, and I knew that I was in mortal danger. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The air grew still and quiet once again, and I was left sitting in my tent, alone with my thoughts. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat there, waiting for the sun to rise, listening to the whispers that seemed to echo in my head. And when the dawn finally broke, I knew that I had to get out of there. I packed up my things and got in my car, driving as fast as I could away from that cursed place. And as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something that had latched onto me like a parasite. I don't know if I'll ever go back into that wilderness again. The memory of that night still haunts me, and I know that there are things out there that we can't explain or understand. Skinwalkers are real, and they're not just legends. They're something far more terrifying, something that can shatter our understanding of the world around us. and I fear that they're still out there waiting in the darkness for their next victim.